Welcome to Steve and Matt's podcast. It's a very creative podcast, and we invite creative people we know to discuss their artistic endeavors. Steve, what can people expect by joining us?
Well, Matt, that was terrible. The purpose of this show, and I'm so glad to be with you here right now, is to talk about the ups and downs, the challenges, the upsides, the travails, and the triumphs of independent artists. Whether you're a filmmaker, musician, comedian, painter, dancer, performance artist, you name it.
Can we
Everything
find
that
magicians? Can we host magicians? Do you consider them artists, independent artists?
we can host whomever you want.
Oh, great. I'm going to go find some magicians.
Indeed. I've actually known a few magicians in my day, and I'm being serious. But the point is that to talk about, all of the things that are both glorious and frustrating of trying to make art as part of your daily life, as part of who you are and what you do, when you don't have major backing, you don't have a financier. And in some cases, you might be living on a shoestring, or in other cases, you might be wearing a pair of golden handcuffs where, your job makes it very difficult for you to continue to create. So that's really why we're here and what we do. So, Matt, to get us started, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I've always hated saying the word filmmaker, but if I had to quantify my passion in life, it would be that. I've made a few short films. It's something I've done since I was a kid when I stole my parents' camcorder and we used to film really dumb sketches around the neighborhood because that's when Tom Green and Jackass came out. And it's kind of been a central piece of my identity ever since then. And that was fifth or sixth grade. Recently, because of my job, I have the opportunity to take courses, and I took a couple of video classes, which were great. I got to create some stuff there, and I also enjoy photography.
You're a multimedia guru now, right? You do a lot of video shooting, correct?
I'd say that's pretty much it. These days, a lot more Zoom calls. But
yeah, I think everyone in the working world is doing that. So that's interesting. So I happen to know you. So to flesh that out a little bit, when you say a filmmaker, do you mean to actually shoot on 8mm, 16mm? Are you talking about filming digitally? Are you talking about video work? And I also happen to know that you are something of a documentarian as well. So I'd be curious to talk about your foray into narrative film, if you will, and your work in documentaries too, and another related project.
Yeah, well, I enjoy writing. If I had to say my interests are anything, it's a narrative. Documentary wise, I have worked on a few docs that have been on Netflix, mainly through a buddy of mine who I got close with, and he's kind of brought me onto projects. And it's been a really.
Is that Quentin Tarantino?
Yeah, I don't think Quentin Tarantino makes documentaries.
I don't know who that is. I'm just saying a name. No, but go on. So you're on Netflix. Do you want to tell the good people what one or two are?
Be the Bill Murray stories, and it would be Ghost Heads.
Okay, so those are bona fide works, documentaries. You said, right?
Yep. I can't take any creative credit for it necessarily, but I was there. It's interesting. That's all I really got in that regard.
Right. And you were talking about your writing, but still, I have no documentaries on Netflix, so you get two more than I do.
I just have two credits that on movies that happen to be on Netflix, but I guess that is saying something. And it's on the Bill Murray stories was on American Airlines flights. So if anybody watched that documentary, I think that's actually the coolest thing about having my name on that is the fact that people could be watching on an airplane and seeing my name. And that is actually more exciting to me than having my name be on a Netflix movie.
Do you have some fetishistic thing about airplanes?
No, I can't. It's just it's fun. Like it's just cool, you know. Like being how high do planes fly? It's higher than 14,000 feet, right? Like airplane. Like if you're flying somewhere, like going to Florida or something, you're above 14,000. You're like 20 to 30, right?
At least, yes.
And it's kind of interesting to think about that. You know, you're defying the laws of gravity in a big steel plane, and you know, as you're crashing, you could be potentially reading my name. It's kind of interesting.
You've done some obviously some credible work, and done some short films, and you expressed a passion for writing. So, what kind of writing are you doing now, or have you done?
Well, a big focus of my writing, I'd say I'm interested in horror, but I mainly lean towards writing like drama. I really enjoy drama. I find it an interesting outlet for me because just being from kind of suburbia and seeing how people's lives kind of fall apart because of drug use. It's
Hmm.
been a very heavy point on my life.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I've always found that my writing kind of reflects that cliche suburban strangling of the human spirit, but it's privileged, which is kind of interesting too. But I think that that kind of adds an interesting angle to the whole thing, you know, because you kind
Hmm.
of have like the suburbs and where I grew up. It's you know a bunch of middle class white kids for the most part, but yet there was like such a an obsession with kind of trying to be harder than you were, like in the gangster sense or like the
Hmm.
rapper sense, or kind of taking that grim Philadelphia attitude like of North Philly and doing a skin graft on top of suburban living. It's just an interesting culture, and, you know, and then you get kind of all the things that comes with that influence. And when you add people who have more privilege and kind of the self-destructive
Hmm.
things that come out of that, I just find it fascinating.
Well, that's funny because you live and work in the city now, and that's a sort of an interesting narrative, if you will. So let me ask you a question. I mean, I know you work for a living and you're producing stuff at work and on your own. So, what are the challenges? What are the challenges to try to create a short film or a documentary? Like we had talked previously over dinner and a few beers about a project you are either conceiving or about to work on about substance abuse, and I think it was focused on a central person, real life person. So you're at home, you're trying to work. So what are some of the challenges of trying to get things done?
Well, that documentary, that was actually going to be a documentary project. There's a great podcast called Dopey, and it's a guy from New York who started a podcast with his buddy who passed away from a relapse. And I was in contact with him about potentially doing a documentary, but the thing kind of fell apart because I was in class at the time, and things kind of got very stressful, and I wasn't exactly getting what I wanted, so I kind of gave up on it.
Hmm.
So I think that that's probably a lesson. You know, I was kind of a little stubborn in that I wanted to do something my way and he wanted
Hmm.
something completely different. And it's his right, you know, especially
Hmm.
when you're dealing with someone else's intellectual property and their
Hmm.
baby. They want to,
Sure.
one, protect what they're doing, and two, you know, they want you to prove yourself to them.
Hmm.
And I say that my biggest Achilles heel is I love coming up with ideas, but the follow through is kind of hard. For instance, I used to love sitting down and writing. Like I have notebooks full of scripts that I wrote in, you know, high school and college, like little short films. But now it's like I try and sit down and I begin writing, and it's either I psych myself out and I think I can't finish it, or
Hmm.
I'm like, fuck this, and I kind of run away from it, you know?
So let me ask you a dumb question, and I say this because I do music, and songwriting is a key component of that, and I've written music for a long time. So you say you have scripts in high school. Why don't you go back to the scripts you have in high school, and keeping in mind you wrote them as a student? I mean, there must be some good ideas in there. Couldn't you, even if you don't have the mojo right now, like let's just say you come home from work at 6, 7 o'clock, you get some dinner, and you're just not feeling it. Can you flip open a notebook from high school and say maybe I can mine some of those ideas there and bring
Well,
some
yeah.
of that to life?
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. I mean, I have one written about kids who ring doorbells and run away. And I've always wanted to make it. And it's one of those things that I want to dig out. But honestly, like, I don't know, it's hard. The content is there, I kind of judge myself on an absurd scale. And I'm sure you can relate to that being a musician, you know? I mean, I'm in awe of the fact that you even released an album at this stage. I mean,
Quarantine album, yes.
quarantine. Well, but this has been how long have you been working on your album? Do you want to plug that? What do you have going on
Well,
with your
so
existence?
so sure, I'm happy to do that, but let's talk about you first a little bit, because I'm curious for the parallels, and for anyone listening, like if you're a painter and you work alone, the thought of trying to film a sketch or a short film about someone doing ding dong ditch it with the doorbell, right? Ringing doorbells and running. When you think about actually trying to execute that, even if you have the most simple of scripts, you still need someone to operate the camera, and then someone to go ring the doorbell, and then
Well,
someone to open the door, right? Let's just hold that thought for a second, right? And with musicians, it's a little bit different. If you are a one person shop with, Pro Tools, or at least Logic Pro or something like that, and you can use, software, or if you're a multi instrumentalist, record everything in your home
mhm,
studio. But if you're
yeah.
collaborative, you got to work with other people, and that involves the kind of compromise you were alluding to earlier. So, is part of the resistance you're facing excluding your own external critic, just trying to get people to collaborate with?
Oh yeah. I mean, I have a buddy who we're doing a free screenwriting course. We both quit because the YouTube chats were like too crazy, so we kind of got out of there. But we decided last week that we were going to go through the course together because we have access to it, you know, the whole back catalog of the lessons and everything that you need to do. But, you know, he's a guy who, like me, has a full time job in the multimedia world. And then on top of that, well, he's married. He just bought a house out in the suburbs and he's expecting twins. And this is actually like my chief collaborator. If I had
Sure.
to say I had one on like that kind of filmmaking level in the sense, well, but even then my other buddy who's brought me on these documentaries, married, lives
Hmm.
in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So, and he's shooting houses all day. He does real estate videos.
Okay.
So it's kind of hard when, especially as something as collaboration heavy as filmmaking,
Hmm.
to kind of do it when you become older. I don't, but maybe it's
Sure.
not. Maybe it isn't. But I'm also not interested in, you know, these people on YouTube who just film like a model who's like an Instagram person and just slaps a lens on the camera and just goes and plays out in the woods for a day.
Sure, sure. I
Ye-
mean, if you want to do anything even remotely narrative, or even something documentary like, you need some kind of structure, and you need participation of other human beings.
Well,
And
that's why I think documentary is a lot easier. You can be a one man band and do documentary.
but you
There's
still need someone to interview. You still need to send those emails and texts, occasionally get, site permissions and so forth in order to do it, right? Given the fact that you and everyone else who's growing up, you have day jobs and you have lives, how do you muster the energy, the mojo, to move any project forward? I mean, that's one of the things that I think is most relevant about this show.
Yeah, I that's a great question, and I think that that was the value of taking a filmmaking course, because I actually had to get a short film done, and I
Hmm.
did. And my friends were very patient with me to get that done because there were a couple like really long shooting days.
Hmm.
Um, but we had to get it done. The script wasn't that strong. It was more experimental, but I don't know. We got it done. It felt good to get done, but you know, it's a pain in the ass and it burns people out even doing a little project like that. Where and then the other side is like then it's a question of okay, well, am I just not going to do it? And I think
Hmm.
that that's kind of the real battle.
Well, so you talked about it getting done, and it sounds like that felt pretty good. Is that a motivator at all? Like, to what extent, when you get something completed, is that fulfilling to you in any way artistically? And there's a reason I'm asking that, which I can flesh out in a little bit, but I'd be curious for your thoughts on what you feel when something like that reaches its natural conclusion.
It felt I mean, it feels great to finish something.
Could you
But
be more specific? What does a great mean? What?
well, it just means like, you know, you kind of climb over a mountain or you scale up a mountain and, you know, I find there nothing better than being on set, because when you're in it and you're all locked in, you kind of get shit done. And actually is the most when I feel most productive is in like the throes of shooting,
Mhm.
because it's kind of like you're actually on a battlefield getting something done. And then when you complete it, I mean, with that short, I'm not completely happy with how it turned out, but
Right. No, and here's the reason I ask, right? Because
it didn't feel complete. But yeah, keep going or
but
whatever
but
you were
the
going to say.
but the project was done, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no going back at this point. It's released into the universe, and
Mm,
you're not
well, it was
pulling it back.
shown to people in the universe, but I wouldn't call it released.
You know what I mean? But in other words,
Yeah.
it's done. You're not going to go back and continue to tinker. In other words, like the project's
No,
done.
no.
So the reason I ask is that you mentioned the album that my band, the Low Mice, just finished. So I've been a musician for a while, and I've been on. I'm trying to think. One, two, three, at least four other albums before this one, right? And I've written songs for them, and so on and so forth. But the interesting thing is that when I'm involved in a musical project and I'm writing or playing or whatever, I feel the most alive. And when a song that I've been working on, and I don't write a song in like one day or a few hours, it takes me a really long time. I've written quite a few, but they take a while. When it's actually done, and for some reason, when it's recorded, not just played or played out, but when it's recorded and I can hear it in its sort of final form, I get this great sense of fulfillment.
Mhm.
Like I heard an expression once someone used about when they go and do good things. I'm not saying the songs I write are good or that it's a good act to do them, but the person said it's my tithe to the universe, right? I feel like I'm birthing something into the universe, as grandiose as that sounds. So when it's done, like it's completed. The funny thing is, I don't feel particularly satisfied. I feel fulfilled, but I
Mhm.
don't feel satisfied. I'm just ready to move on more to write more. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So since releasing this album that just came out a couple of weeks ago, are you in the beginning stages of kind of developing maybe another album with the Low Mice? Are you
Well,
where are you at in that?
so the timeline is a little bit off. So my current stuff with the Low Mice is a collaboration between me and a couple other musicians I've worked with for quite a long time back in the Boston music scene. And this album is kind of that's out now, Anhedonia, is the result of a couple of years work with them on a bunch of songs we've had in our repertoire, if you will. But the funny thing is that we released it now, but in the meantime, we've already been in the studio a couple times in Boston to record another album. This album has been sort of sitting for a little while, waiting to be released. And this pandemic, with all of its horrible tragedy and disruption, gave us the time to actually focus and get it out, which is great. So it's wonderful to have it done. And as you say, I hear it and I'm like, oh, we could have done this better. We could have tweaked this. The bass is too quiet in this song or whatever. But it's done, right? And it feels fulfilling. Is it perfect? No, but it's completed and that feels really good. But we've already been working on this other record all the while, right? And so now we're at a point where we have to do a couple more overdubs and master it, and that album's done.
Oh,
That's
so
gonna,
you have a second album waiting in the wings.
yeah. I mean, we released 10 songs on this record, and we have, I think, 11 or 12 on the next one. We recorded 15 for this next record, but we're only gonna release, I think, 11 or 12 of them that are ready. We think for public consideration, if you will. So you mentioned deadlines, right? Having a film class and having to get ready. So we booked the studio that we worked in Boston months and months ago, and we had a bunch of songs ready. But we also had several songs that weren't ready. And you talk about a motivator. Some of them were in really good shape. Some of them were only half written and I just had to rush to sort of finish them. And I'm very happy with what came out, most especially when we arrived at the studio and the engineer producer we worked with was very, very good at imposing discipline on us, and a process on us and helping us think through arrangements where, the completed songs are kind of surprises now, right? We never kind of expected it to come out the way it has, but we're really happy about it.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that process, that relationship?
Sure. So we went into a studio in Boston. It's called Rear Window, and our drummer Jeff had recorded a bunch of albums with another group he was in called Pressure Cooker there. Beautiful sounding albums, and Jeff was insistent we work in that studio with this producer, engineer, this gentleman by the name of Craig. And it was absolutely wonderful. Great space, great equipment. We recorded on 2-inch tape. We recorded to 2-inch tape and digitally as backup. So the takes we did, whatever you think of the playing, just sounded rich and warm and resonant and highly dynamic. It was amazing. And when we went in there, we had some pretty set ideas about arrangements, but he kind of pushed us to sort of consider other ways of laying those songs out. And you mentioned earlier about being a little stubborn about when you've got an idea that's your baby, you want to see it through to what you may see as its natural artistic outcome. And I've learned a lot in my days as a musician. Oftentimes, musicians, and I say this as a musician, especially when they're younger, they can be very emotional, volatile, a little impulsive. Um, I've left my fair share of bands in a huff, right? Just like I don't want to deal with these people, right? And having had that experience, I'm a lot more patient now. So as I'm sitting there biting my tongue, waiting for these arrangements to be sorted out for songs I've had written for ages, it actually turned out really, really well. A couple of experiments didn't quite work, but we still had takes that worked well. But we had a couple songs where the arrangements were sort of fundamentally recreate or revisioned, if you will. Whatever anyone else thinks, I was really surprised and happy with the roughs when we heard them back, a few weeks after we left the studio. It was kind of amazing. What I thought was great about it is that I was really happily surprised by the way things turned out just by being more collaborative, creatively collaborative with my two other bandmates and the producer.
But do you have a specific example of how maybe your producer teased out a version of a song or maybe a guitar lick that you may not have considered? Like how did the producer's role kind of shape your music? And I'm asking you this as someone who's never written any music.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of
So,
just curious about what, because you hear so much about the producer
right.
band relationship and what that means. You know what I mean? They always like, whenever you hear bands talk about the producer, they're always like, oh, this guy's like fucking, I don't know, he just comes in, he just does voodoo magic on us. And that's how we came up with fucking Appetite for Destruction or something. You know, I just don't like it.
Yeah.
It just always seems so vague to me, like what a producer does and how they kind of work with a band in their own style.
Yeah, sure. So when we've recorded with really engineers. Like I was in two fairly popular ska bands, the Alstonians and another one on the one hand, and Steady Ernest on the other, where we had independent label and distributor backing, but we paid for our own recordings out of our gig and touring money and hope to make profit back through sales through the distributor and through the record company, the independent record companies we worked with. And when I was in a punk rock group, we had a super independent shoestring label that distributed for us. And we worked with, again, someone who was more like an engineer and, did a fine job, but we were kind of running the show. And when you're an independent artist, independent musician, that's really probably the best you're going to get. You're not going to have a record company come in and through an advance or whatever else connect you with some amazing Svengali like producer. So when Jeff introduced us to Craig at Rear Window, he had that ear and vision for working with bands and songwriters and helping to bring that set of recordings to life in really interesting ways. So one song in particular, and this is what I mean, I had a song and had it written for a while, and I had just placeholdered it spaghetti western, right? I hadn't written lyrics for it, and I had like 2 weeks to get it ready for the studio, and so I had wrote it more like a spaghetti western twangy type thing. So we bring it in and we're trying to figure out an arrangement, my two bandmates and I. And Craig suggested a very different Latin sounding drum beat, very sort of complex and sophisticated. And Jeff, our drummer and fellow songwriter. He's just amazing, and he laid down exactly what Craig suggested. They have kind of a good energy and connection between them. So he got it right away, and we followed along. And the next thing you know, the song has totally metamorphosized. Right? It's still the same song, A minor to D minor, and so on and so forth, but it has this haunting new sound to it, rhythm and flow. And again, that's one of those things where you come out on the other side really pleasantly surprised. However crappy my performance may be on it, I got to be a part of that, and that's really exciting, right?
And that became Punch and Llama Blues?
No, 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 no.
Or is this on the new
That
album?
that no, the Punch and Llama Blues is on Anhedonia,
Okay.
which is out now everywhere. And the song I mentioned, I'm not going to say what it is because it's unreleased, but that'll
Okay.
probably be out at this point. The way things are running, we can't get back in the studio right now, but
Right.
we'll probably be out next year.
Okay. And this is the second album. This is like the 15 songs you have that you're going to be releasing 12 of as of
10,
now.
yeah, I would say
10 to
probably,
12.
yeah, exactly. Yep. So that was really exciting. But again, it's one of the travails where I can't, run to Boston every time I want to pick up a guitar and play with my chums, right? We have to coordinate it all out, and we don't have label backing. I mean, we have our own label, That's Adequate Records, which we love, but we got to do it ourselves. We're the classic DIY musicians, and we're just trying to do the best we can. So, and that's actually one of the reasons why we started this show, right? Is that
Mhm.
is that if we're like this, I mean, you just look at the landscape around you on social media, and and any of the scenes that anyone's involved in, and whatever your thing is, comedy, dance, painting, you name it.
Twitch,
Twitch,
Discord,
yeah,
YouTube. That's pretty much that's where the money is.
right. But if you're actually interested in making even anything that resembles art,
Mhm.
I mean, good luck. That's part of it too. Like when one of the things that I thought might be appealing about this show is that I find a lot of creative types, not all, but a lot, are really good at creating and maybe not so great at shilling for what they do, influencing, right? They're not necessarily
Interesting.
influencers. And honestly, a lot of the people I find the most compelling, awesome, you're not going to hear about them through their million Twitter followers or whatever. They're in the underground, right?
Mhm.
It's this really wacky stuff you find just trolling around SoundCloud or Spotify or whatever else. You're just like, what the heck is that? That is amazing. And that's what I thought that also, bubble up some interesting people and ideas with the show, is that where's some of that great stuff happening?
Yeah, that's like I listen to a lot of like ambient music and I
Sure.
just like Brian Eno shit. And I just find all of that music fascinating that these people actually sit down and come up with these cosmic arrangements that are just so atmospheric and sublime.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
just every time, like, I mean, I just have it like a floating through space mix I found on Spotify. And I'm just fascinated by it. The fact that people can come up with this stuff that is just pure emotion.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know what point I'm trying to make, but
Well,
I
there's
just
just
think
so
it's so good.
right. There's so much out there to discover, I think, is the point. And just because, and I think one thing that really makes me despair is you see someone out there that has 60,000 or 2 million followers, and half the time I haven't even heard of them. And I just think to myself, like, how do they do this? Or you see someone and they've got 3,000 likes on their their latest Instagram post, and I'm like, who is this? You know, and you can tell everything they do is sepia toned and photoshopped and everything else. And I don't know, but in terms of that discovery, and you mentioned the kind of surfing or trolling, looking for new and interesting stuff. When you did the videos for us for Anhedonia, for the YouTube version of our album, the one thing that struck me is that all the great stuff that's out there, the public domain stuff that you discovered out
Oh
there from
yeah,
ages and ages and
endless.
ages ago, like there's all these undiscovered artists who probably aren't even with us anymore, and their stuff is out there and it still lives, and we're able to access it digitally. That to me is one of the amazing things too about trying to do anything artistic is, on the one hand, you do it and maybe people listen to it or watch it or experience it, whatever, and there's the possibility that others may discover it and be inspired by it later,
Well,
sometimes
maybe
100
yeah.
years later, right, or more.
Well, maybe we should put a feather in that and say maybe a component of the show could be digging up some of these people you maybe never would have heard of through archive or another means. And let's, maybe sample their work for
Yeah,
our audience.
yeah, it's a great idea.
So that's definitely something to think about.
Absolutely. Well, Matthew, that seems like a great way to conclude this episode. And coming up, we've got some other great shows where we're going to bring a couple people on from, again, diverse array of fields, everything from comedy to music to you name it. So, pleasure talking with you.
This has been a real pleasure, and I hope this was as much fun as it was for me. Excited to see kind of where this goes, and I very much look forward to sharing more about ourselves and our guests to you all.
We're all locked in now.
Sense of gloom is like a blanket you can wrap yourself in.